Hello, everybody. All right, I'm going to go ahead and admit the attendees. All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining today. We appreciate the time you've taken to participate in the session. I'm here on behalf of Circular Action Alliance, CAA, the producer responsibility organization under SB54 in California. Today's presentation will focus on covered cost methodology and the payment mechanism that we are developing to ensure local governments and service providers are fairly reimbursed for new and additional costs incurred to comply with the law. Quick reminders about today's session. This is being recorded, and we ask that you please ask your questions in the chat function until we open up the floor for questions at the end. And then once we get to that point, please just go ahead and use the raise hand feature. We will also be providing contact information for this project team at the end if you have any further questions after the end of our session. I will cover the meeting objectives here. So today our goals are fivefold. We'll start with a quick overview of SB54 and CAA's role in its implementation. Then we'll introduce the covered cost methodology and the payment mechanism, two key components that will determine how reimbursement works. We'll also walk you through the data collection process that's currently underway and explain how this data supports our work. We'll clarify how local governments and your service providers are expected to participate and the benefits to participating. And finally, we want to make space for questions and hear your feedback. As we know, it's a crucial part of making this process effective, and it's grounded in your day-to-day realities. So that being said, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. Why did you join this webinar today, and what change do you want to see in your recycling system? So currently I'll transition over to my colleague, David Youssef, but again, please, you're welcome to describe what brought you here today in the chat.
Morning, everyone. Happy to see that we're seeing a decent turnout with people still rolling in. This is the first time that we're trying to socialize with interested parties, like what we're working on here as it relates to SB54 and the program plan and reimbursement. And we're happy that you're being success. So, like Katie said, take the time if you have a minute or two while you're listening to the presentation just to provide some context as to what you're hoping to achieve, why you're participating today, what you're hoping to learn from the conversation. So in terms of SB54, so it's California's Plastic Pollution Prevention Packaging Producer Responsibility Act. It sets some very ambitious goals for 2032. Namely, all covered materials must be recyclable or compostable by that year. 100% of single-use packaging and plastic foodware must be fully recyclable. 65% of single-use plastic packaging and foodware must be actually recycled. The SB54 also introduces extended producer responsibility, EPR for short. We think that this is a groundbreaking policy approach, shifting responsibility from local governments and ratepayers to directly onto producers for the costs of managing covered materials. CAA, Circular Action Alliance, as the producer responsibility organization, is tasked with ensuring these new costs are clearly identified and fully reimbursed by producers, reducing financial pressures on you and your communities. To fulfill the responsibility, this SB54 explicitly requires CA to develop two critical components. A covered cost methodology, which this is basically a transparent framework to identify what new and additional costs are eligible for reimbursement. And we would do this through guidance information that we would put out. And then second, we have to develop a payment mechanism, so a streamlined system for timely distribution of funds from producers directly to you, the local jurisdictions, and your service providers. This can be done, most likely be done, for example, through an online portal for the application process. So effectively, what this means is that we would outline what costs are eligible for funding, what projects, initiatives are eligible for funding, and then if you have an initiative or project that falls within that, then you would apply for funding and then, if approved, reimbursed. So we're currently developing these two frameworks as central elements of our 2026 program plan for CalRecycle, and you'll hear a little bit more about what that is in a few slides. It's important that accurate data is collected directly from local governments and services yourself. Through this, we want to talk to you about today, which is foundational to the reimbursement. So our legal mandate is clear under SB54. Establish a transparent, fair, and practical reimbursement process, and that accurately captures and reimburses your net new and additional expenses. To meet this obligation, the current this data collection initiative is focused on establishing reliable and accurate baseline costs for 2022, and we'll explain why that's important. Clearly identifying incremental costs directly attributable to SB54 implementation, and developing a transparent payment process that is fair, practical, defensible, ensuring your communities get the funding they deserve. So two key documents are a couple that are influencing our work. Our program required by SB54 and due to CalRecycle in 2026. It details how CAA will achieve compliance with the law, including payment methodologies, educational P&E initiatives, source reduction strategies, overall budget, producer fees, and so on. There's also CalRecycle's needs assessment. One component of that needs assessment, the collection, processing, and markets, is being developed by HF&H and HDR. It provides a high-level snapshot of recycling systems, infrastructure across California. Although it helps inform our program planning, our cover cost methodology will provide a more detailed and actionable approach based on and jurisdictional costs. We just want to go through sort of the the process that we're utilizing to develop our reimbursement strategy, which involves 4 work streams. The first work stream is the covered cost payment and administrative process. So this is the mechanics and systems that govern how we manage and reimbursement application. It defines what's eligible and what's not. It defines how to go about seeking funding and what that review process and evaluation process looks like. It details a dispute resolution process in case there's disagreement between various parties. Work streams 2 and 3, cost analysis, it details the detailed cost analysis where that we need to collect in order to inform the payment process, is what we're talking about today and where we require your input. Workstream 4, the system optimization material strategy, it's basically assessing how best can we manage covered materials and those materials that are a little bit more difficult to collect, process, sort, and recycle. California, and what are the system changes we should support in order to meet our SB54 goals. So in terms of the survey request that we're going to be detailing in a few slides is, we're aware that multiple surveys have been coming your way from different organizations through different initiatives. This survey is targeted specifically to meet regulatory requirements under SB54. It's narrowly tailored to gather baseline cost data. Like I mentioned before, critical for the reimbursement eligibility and process. So to minimize the administrative burden on you and providing data or information, we've partnered with MSW and Crow, who you'll hear about in a few short moments. Both firms will directly support your team through this process, making it straightforward and manageable. I think we think that your cooperation in providing detailed cost data now will help ensure accurate and fair reimbursements later. So let's quickly emphasize or discuss why the payment mechanism is so important to your community. In terms of fair and full compensation, it ensures you receive direct reimbursement for all new and additional costs incurred due to SB54 without passing those costs onto your residents. It protects your existing contracts, so your current franchise agreements remain protected under PRC 40059B, meaning no unexpected changes or cost shift to ratepayers. And in terms of community benefits without rate increases, I think your community may be able to enjoy improved recycling services and infrastructure support funded by producers and not residents. Eligible cost categories, so they fall into three broad categories for meeting SB54 obligations. So there's collection and processing costs. These may include expanded collection routes, adding new materials to your recycling systems, or sorting and processing equipment. Infrastructure and system improvements, so funding can cover significant MRF upgrades, sorting technology improvements, in logistics and optimization, and education administrative costs. So producer funded reimbursement can cover public outreach, ratepayer education campaigns, and compliance related enforcement and reporting. And both all are under all categories. They can be both operational or capital costs. So here's how, at a high level, the reimbursement process is designed to work. It's designed to operate smoothly and efficiently, we hope, at the end of the day. First step in the process is a request from yourself or your service provider for funding, where an application is submitted. Then there is an evaluation and assessment. So we, CAA, will evaluate the request against clear and transparent criteria. And then the project agreement is drafted, specifying performance expectations and reporting obligations. And then once conditions are met, CAA releases the reimbursement funds, ensuring timely payments based on validated costs. So why 2022 for baseline? So costs before January 1st, 2023 aren't eligible under SB54, making 2022 the ideal baseline year for accurate comparison. Reliable baseline data helps avoid potential underfunding or reimbursement issues down the line. This data helps ensure that as your community costs increase, reimbursement will scale accordingly, capturing the true financial impacts of SB54. So in other words, to determine appropriate retroactive compensation for system improvements, we need to establish a clear baseline. So in other words, the cost of delivering the relevant service prior to any changes made since January 1st, 2023. This baseline allows us to assess the incremental costs incurred or difference and confirm what should be compensated and by how much. The CAA has partnered with leading industry consultant to support us on the initiative and project. RRS is leading the overall data collection and program plan strategy. MSW consultants will be managing the collection cost data from jurisdictions, and Crow will specialize in detailed MRF cost and processing analysis. Both Crow and MSW will be the folks that you will interact with, part of the surveys. Ultimately, these teams are not here to just provide data and gather data, but to provide ongoing support and guidance throughout the process, not just for CA, but for yourselves as well. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, David Davies from MSW, to speak to the collection cost data gathering exercise.
Thank you, Dave. My name is David Davis. I'm the founder and president of MSW Consultants. We're a solid waste consulting firm, and we provide service in the areas of cost accounting, economics, and public policy. And we provided consulting service to over 100 jurisdictions, mainly in California. So we're well qualified to help CAA and RRS in this effort. Our role in developing the covered cost methodology and payment mechanism is to gather information about the cost of collecting recyclables in 2022, the baseline cost of recycling. And to do that, we've prepared two survey instruments. There's a quantitative survey instrument and a qualitative survey instrument. And I'll show you those in a minute. On the quantitative side, we're going to be gathering the cost of collecting landfill, recyclables, organics, and also mixed streams of waste. And you may wonder, well, if we're only looking at the cost of recycling, why are we gathering information about landfill and organics? And the reason for that is that these the cost of collecting recyclables is usually included in a broader system of collecting all three of these materials. So we didn't want to collect the recycling cost information in a silo. So when we gather the cost of collecting all of these streams, we can evaluate them in the context of one another, and it helps us evaluate the reasonableness of the information that we're getting. And that goes to the fact that we're not just gathering this information, but we're also analyzing it and stress testing it to make sure that it's accurate, so we can get an accurate reimbursement down the road. And also, as part of that, we're going to be
Dave, can you hold on one second? I just want to make
Sure.
sure folks are looking at the right slide.
Well, I'm going to talk from this slide, and I'll tell you when to move it. This is the right slide. I want to talk to these points, and then I'm going to show them some things.
Yeah, just
we had a comment in the chat from Serena. It looks like the slide is stuck on slide 3 in their viewpoint.
Oh,
Is
I'm looking
anybody
at
else
14.
experiencing that?
We should be on slide 14, folks.
Okay,
Yeah,
others are
Jennifer sees
confirming it looks good
14.
on there.
Arisha sees 14. Jason, why you'd be on?
Okay, so there's some advice in the chat. If you go ahead and click sync, it should keep you up to date on where we're at in the presentation. If you click sync to presenter.
Serena, maybe jumping off and jumping back on. Oh, okay, she's good.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, Dave.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I'm gonna talk a little bit from this slide, and then I'm gonna show you some slides pretty quick. But basically, two parts to our survey: the quantitative and the qualitative. On the quantitative, we're going to be gathering cost information, but we're also going to be gathering information, operational information, like the number of stops, cubic yards, routes, and tons. And we're going to be taking that information, calculating some KPIs, using that to evaluate the reasonableness of the quantitative information that we're receiving. The second part of the survey is a policy survey. And in that, we're gathering information on policy and regulatory circumstances that may impact the cost of recyclables. And it's a fairly brief survey. It covers about 10 topics. A lot of them are yes or no. And we think it'll be fairly straightforward for jurisdictions and recycling service providers to answer. And in the context of this, we're reaching out to 167 jurisdictions across California. MSW is going to be doing about 111 of those jurisdictions. Crow is going to be reaching out to 56, mainly in Northern California. And Crow and MSW are going to be communicating with each other on a regular basis to ensure the consistency of the information that we gather. And we selected the 167 cities based on a cross section of California jurisdictions. And we took into consideration the geography, the population density, the location in the state, and the type of service arrangements. So from that 167 jurisdictions, we're going to make some inferences about all of the jurisdictions in the state of California. And next slide, please. I'm going to just show you, this is the quantitative part of the survey. It's a data acquisition form, and it shows that we're going to try and organize the information into single family, multifamily, and commercial sectors. We're going to gather information about landfill disposal fees, recycle processing fees, or organics processing on a per ton basis, just simply what the cost is on a per ton basis on an annual basis. And then at the bottom, you can see we're going to gather information about the tonnage, the stops, the yards, the routes. And then the next slide, please. There's also going to be some slides that we're going to gather information about the number of containers at each level of service. And there'll be a couple of other slides that have to do with commercial and multifamily, asking for the number of bins at each level of service. So basically, it's going to be 4 spreadsheets within a workbook that's going to comprise the quantitative part. And we're going to be on the phone with jurisdictions and recycling service providers, answering questions, walking them through this. So we're not just going to send it to you and expect you to have to send it back to us. We're going to spend time on the phone with all 167 jurisdictions. Next slide, please. And then this is our the qualitative part of our survey, and you can see it has questions to do with service arrangements, rate structure, outreach and education. What do you do with the revenue from the sale of recyclables? So this is more policy and regulatory information, and it covers 10 topics, and we think it's pretty straightforward. So with those 2 survey instruments, we're going to be reaching out to the jurisdictions in the next week or so. So our goal is to reach out and touch the jurisdictions as efficiently, as quickly as possible. We've got a fair amount of people that are on hand ready to help you through this. And the other thing I want to mention is that we're going to be sending this information to both jurisdictions and to the private haulers. So we're going to send a letter out, and the letter is going to be copied to both the jurisdiction and the private hauler. So the jurisdiction is going to be understanding what is being asked of the private haulers. And I should also mention that, in cases where the private hauler is reluctant to share this information, we may be reaching out to the jurisdictions to have us help with that, because there may be something in their franchise agreement that requires the private company to provide this information that's related to their franchise agreement. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jason, and he's going to talk about gathering information about the MRF cost data. Jason?
Thanks, Dave. Okay, hello everyone. So Crow is conducting the MRF cost interview. This is a second component of the efforts that CAA is putting on right now. So the objective for the MRF cost is to develop the baseline for processing recyclables to inform the payment mechanism. So basically similar to the collection cost, but for processing. So for key activities, these 4 bullet points are kind of a high level what we're doing as part of this project. First, one thing that we've already done is to define and validate the MRF processing cross criteria. We have 15 cost categories that ranges from labor, benefits, depreciation, and built-in profit as well. We also define some of the cost drivers that drive those costs, such as number and types of staff and equipment. And I'll go into a little more detail in the next slide on kind of the topics during the interview. We will gather or inventory the MRF costs and as well as operational data that drive those costs, and ultimately to develop a model for each facility based on your individual facilities, costs, and operations. Once we develop the draft model for each facility, we'll try to validate the model with by going back out to providers to see if what we kind of put together in a draft form makes sense. So those are 4 of our key activities as part of the MRF cost interview. In terms of which facilities are included, in terms of what's in scope of facility, we're looking at commingled recyclables processing facilities, MRFs that are currently operating and operated since at least 2022. Again, this is for that 2022 baseline. So we must have a facility that's been operating since then. In terms of what we're sampling, so of the 85 to 90 MRFs across the state, we're sampling about 45, which is about half of the MRFs, which represents a representative mix of public, private, and private facilities. We sampled across various factors such as the 5 Kawasaki regions, small, medium, large MRFs, your type of operation, whether it's a single, dual, or mixed waste stream operation, to be as representative as possible to the entire population of the 85 to 90. Slide. Okay, so I mentioned an interview, so we'll collect our data primarily through a 2-hour interview, which is a little different from the collection cost survey, which is a kind of a combination of survey forms and questionnaires and interview. We're trying to collect all our data that we need on the MRF side via a virtual interview to discuss your 2022 costs, your cost drivers, any key changes beyond 2022 to date, and any anticipated changes in preparation for SB54 as it goes live January 1, 2027. In terms of the interview, these are the example topics that we'll run through to get an understanding of your costs and operations. So we'll want to confirm your facility type, your tonnage, your residual rates, your number and types of staffing, the number of sorters, equipment operators, administrative staff, salary ranges and benefits for each of those. For equipment, the number and types of equipment, how many screens, how many robots, etc., balers, whether you lease or own, and the age and depreciation on those equipment. For energy use, well, it's primarily going to be electricity for a MRF to understand how much energy is being used at a facility. We also want to understand the maintenance hours, how much time you spend on maintaining equipment versus repairing, and how much downtime you get as a result of those repairs. Outbound freight, so transportation from your facility to either a landfill or a end market. So this is going to involve tip fees and whether you haul your own materials to end market or a third party hauls it for you. We'll also go over administrative overhead allocation, which is essentially if there are a kind of a centralized location where the accounting or HR folks is working, and then some of those costs are allocated to the facility based on headcount, revenue, etc. We'll also go over some insurance information in terms of workers' comp and facility equipment insurance. as well. And as I mentioned earlier, I will go over any major changes since 2022. We want to understand, what have facilities done to prepare for SB54 since January 1, 2023 and on. That you've done already, and things that you are anticipating to do come January 1, 2027, in terms of being able to process new covered materials, as well as increasing quality standards to expand your end markets. So who should attend interviews? So we identified two types of staff from facilities that should be on the calls, which is a operations person, an operations general manager, and as well as a finance or accounting officer, either for that facility or for the region. And we're speaking to public entities today. So of the 45 facilities that we're sampling, about 11 or so of those are publicly owned and operated. Another, 10 to 15 are publicly owned but privately operated. Which kind of makes up half of our entire sample. Yeah, look out for an email and phone call from myself to schedule the interview and provide some additional information. We have the letter and FAQ document that we'll send out as well, and schedule an interview with your facility sometime between now through August. And I think one last thing I want to mention is that we'll want to work with you to talk through what makes the most sense to make things as easy as possible. We'll essentially adapt to what you're able to provide us. We'll walk through the questions, make sure that you understand everything that we're asking, and we'll ask questions to make sure that we understand what you're telling us. So it'll be an iterative process, a collaborative process that we'll undertake here. Again, just to make this process as easy as possible for everyone. And as smooth as possible, as we know everyone's super busy and getting kind of flooded with different requests nowadays. So with that, I'll hand it over to Wendy and talk about confidentiality.
All right, thank you, Jason. Good morning, and thank you all for being here. My name is Wendy Pratt. I'm with Crow LLP as well. Just a quick bit of background. Crow is a consulting and a CPA firm. We are have a large office in Sacramento, 100 or so folks. Many of us, Eric, myself, Jason, have years of experience working on recycling and cost of recycling in California. So quite experienced with this area. So I wanted to spend a moment talking about non-disclosure of confidential information. We recognize that some of our questions are, digging into financial and operational information, and we want to make sure that you all understand and are comfortable with sharing that information. We have a very extensive process for maintaining confidentiality. We have non-disclosure agreements, formal legal agreements developed by our team and the MSW team. So we can, sign those, run those through the process. We also have a data share file, a confidential data sharing approach where entities can submit information through our secure portal. Each entity would have a password to provide that information. And we will be aggregating the information that we receive from each of you and ultimately developing models, one for the collection, one for processing, that are going to be based on the criteria, the cost drivers that we're gathering through all of our interview and survey work, but are not going to be exposing or, based on any individual information. It will be aggregated across all of the entities that we're talking to and focused on the various cost drivers that Jason mentioned. So with that, I am going to turn it back to Dave.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, so just a couple of more slides and then we can get into the discussion. Just a little bit more on sort of the benefits, I think, to local governments in terms of this initiative. This initiative delivers, I think, direct, potentially tangible benefits to your jurisdictions. I think there's an opportunity to reduce financial risks and upfront investment required for compliance. I think it has the opportunity to cover a portion of costs or all of costs related to education and outreach obligations. All of those could be fully or partially funded by producers and allows for continuous improvement in recycling infrastructure and services without potentially raising local rates or burdens on your next slide. Just a little bit more on timeline. Looking ahead, here's sort of the project timeline and some of the other key milestones that we have to are trying to meet is, we're hoping to carry out the surveys this month and next and complete by the end of September. We're also planning additional formal consultations with interested parties like yourself in October on the topic of reimbursement. And we're also going to be bringing webinars on other topics like source reduction and responsible ed market that you folks may be interested in hearing about. All of those will be happening in October and November. We'll certainly give you guys more notice than we may have for this one. We recognize sort of the need as we were developing the surveys to do a little bit more outreach. So we put this webinar together to give that information, but recognizing that it may not be enough, recognizing that there are people that we want to speak to that aren't on the call. So there will be, you'll see our contact information at the end of this slide deck and always available for any contact or folks may have. But as Wendy and Jay pointed out, they're hoping to do a little bit more hand-holding, I would say, for lack of a better term, in terms of completing these surveys and questionnaires. Yeah, and ultimately, we're hoping to, submit a program plan that outlines much of what we're talking about today, and that's still needs substantial development between now and then, April 2026. So you'll hear more or an updated version of what we talked about today in terms of the process in the fall and most likely subsequent to that as well. We're also planning to be at CRA in Monterey first week of August 3rd and 6th. So, if you folks are planning to be there, please look out for us. Happy to have some discussions about this and other SB54 related work that CA is involved in.
Great, and with that, we can open it up for questions. So please go ahead and use the raised hand feature in Teams to line up for questions. Otherwise, feel free to continue using the chat function. And here is our contact information if you have any questions you'd like to follow up with offline.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure what to make of that, right? We either did a super job in explaining it all, or people are just shell-shocked. I have no idea. I'm not sure which to think. So,
are people able to unmute themselves? Is that going to be a technical thing or? Kevin, thank you. Saving us.
Yeah, I was
ahead.
starting to type it in the chat, but I'll just explain it to you. So if we made a process improvement, like for example, an optical sorter after January 2023, and it targeted a difficult specific material type like polypropylene, but they also have polypropylene, beverage containers covered under the bottle bill, but it helps us capture both, foodware type of polypropylene as well as CRV containers. Would part of that, would that be eligible for some reimbursement, or how's that viewed?
I think that's a great question. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Susan Robinson to answer. This will give you guys an opportunity to meet Susan as well if you haven't met her, and she can adequately answer the question better than I can.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you asked that question. It's very appropriate. So as you look back towards January 1st, 2023, as you point out, investments that have been made since then will be eligible for funding when they are relative to covered materials that are considered part of the program. So as you identify, your optical sorter is sorting out some CRV, which is not part of the program, not part of the covered materials, but it sounds to me like many of them are. So we have a system set up that there'll be an allocation of cost. And so if for example, it covered a couple of other things that weren't covered materials or that were covered materials, we can allocate that cost and look back. It'll be a process to evaluate it, look at what, kind of the layout of the cost systems itself. And we'll be able to provide funding for the portion that applies to the covered materials that are included in SB54.
Okay, and I know this is getting into the weeds, and you're coming and visiting our facility, so we'll talk it more in depth there. But realize that sometimes we actually installed a series of optical sorters, and sometimes certain optical sorters would be targeted on CRV materials, but having the optical sorter allowed us to take other covered materials in a better way, if that makes sense. The burden depth goes down, so we're able to sort better on some of the materials that you are targeting through CAA. So we'll talk when you visit, but you may have to do a pretty sophisticated allocation.
Yeah, I think the allocation
Let me
is really
pop in real quick if I might.
Yeah,
Thanks. I think this is a great question.
Can I ask one thing, Wendy?
Yeah.
What facility is it? Just so.
This is the Napa facility.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin.
Great.
Okay, Wendy, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I think that really points out the importance of us getting a really good foundation and baseline and understanding both what you had in 2022 and the changes you've made since then. And we will work through with you in the interview process. And we are also planning on going to a reasonable number of facilities in person. It sounds like yours might be a good one to visit. It's also just down the road. So it does really emphasize it is going to be important for us through our interview process to understand your operation and sort of the drivers of your operation and the changes that you have made and are interested in making going forward. So thank you.
And the needs assessment, they're coming to visit us August 18th, but that's different than yours?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
We won't come August 18th.
Don't come that day.
I'd like to do one other thing. There was a question about reimbursement versus funding that Dave answered. I think this also is an example of reimbursement for funding that happened previous to 2020. Just looking back, it's already been made. That would fall into the category of reimbursement when the application is made, versus application for future investments may be done in different ways. As Dave pointed out, there'll be a variety of ways to look at that depending on the situation. But I do think this is a good example of reimbursement versus the different kinds of fundings that we'll be considering in looking forward for future investments.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Rachel? Yeah.
I think, Kevin, that last question, it would be good, Susan and Dave, if you, for the, and Wendy, actually, if we give a little more context to how this survey or how these interviews are going to be different than the needs assessment, and the benefit to the participants in seeing the difference between our participation and participating in our activities versus the needs assessment, and why those are different activities.
Do you want me
Probably
to?
you, Susan. Yeah, Susan,
I
maybe
think-
you
Susan?
start.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I think Dave kind of gave a good introduction to that, in that the needs assessment being done by HF&H is a Calver cycle requirement that looks very broadly at a lot of different things, both qualitative and quantitative. And it really, I think, will, it's and after you've probably all seen it, quite frankly, and so it's very broad. The CAA project here is very uniquely driven by a requirement in the statute to create the cost that establishes the baseline the baseline cost, so that we can fund that net new and additional. So the survey that's being done by Crow and by MSW is a much narrower, specific, strategic requests for information that will be used for this base cost analysis, and then being able to then facilitate that funding, looking forward to be able to support projects dating back to 2023, and then looking forward in the future for additional funding that's needed in order to meet the needs of the requirements of SB54 without passing on cost to ratepayers. So that's really what this is intended to do over time. All those additional costs that are required to meet the requirements of SB54 are covered through these processes for funding these projects.
That's great, Susan. Wendy, Dave, do you have anything to add to that? I think it's just that specificity that we really that we're seeking in building the producer responsibility organization plan that we're really seeking. And if all of you who are participating today can really think about from CAA's perspective, we have to build this plan that's going to be very specific. If you think about all of the EPR programs in California and the plans that are built, this is going to be tenfold, right? We're going to put forward really the roadmap for California on how is it that we're going to achieve the objectives of SB54 on behalf of the producers, and what is that going to look like for infrastructure in this specific case. And so this survey and what Crow and MSW are really seeking is what is that landscape going to look like. And so for those of you who know me from my previous life, when we think about 1383 and the infrastructure that we needed for 1383, wouldn't it have been nice if we had been able to, in advance of implementing 1383, really thought about what we needed where regionally, and how do we structure that? And that's what MSW and Crow are really piecing together. And how are we going to fund those pieces, and working with you on how are we going to fund those things and fill in those gaps to meet the objectives on behalf of the Pro. So it's a really wonderful opportunity to work cooperatively and build that partnership, and figuring out what are the infrastructure needs and how do we fund those things.
Thanks, Rachel. That was great.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Apologies if I missed something. I joined a few minutes late, but just looking for clarification. So I think I heard Wendy stating that most of the, or all of the data that was being gathered would be used in an aggregate way. And what I'm wondering is, so it's been confirmed that San Diego would be participating in the study. So for future requests for funding for, covered costs or reimbursement for the city of San Diego, would the data from this survey be used to determine if San Diego's reimbursement or covered costs requests would be covered or not, based on the data that we provided in this survey for our 2022 baseline?
Can I take a shot at that, Dave? This is Dave Davis. San Diego is kind of unique because for 100 years they had this people's ordinance, right? So there was an actual cost incurred, and I think it was measured. They recently had a rate study done, and I think they've implemented a new rate structure. So just for everybody, this is a city that paid for the cost of collection out of the general fund, based on an ordinance that was passed in the 30s. And they just recently transitioned to have a rate like most cities. So we have a copy of that the HFH rate study report that was done, but we're probably going to maybe go into depth with the accounting staff there in San Diego to see if there's any information specifically about 2022. So you're kind of a special case, Jennifer. We may take the information in that cost study report and maybe deflate it back to 2022, or there might be some actual cost accounting information that you have internally in the city that may be useful to us. Does that answer your question?
Yes and no. I mean, yeah, it's complicated here specifically. But in general, for other jurisdictions as well, is the purpose of this study, and you're only looking at 167 jurisdictions out of all the jurisdictions in California. So is the purpose of this study for those 167 jurisdictions to provide their baseline such that future requests for funding from CAA for changes due to SB54 would be based on this survey?
I
Meaning
can jump in here. So when there is a covered cost request, there will be an application, Wendy. And so no, what you're submitting here will be, as you've stated, will be evaluated as part of the aggregate. And that, no, this is part of a study for us to be looking at. Again, as I was stating, we're trying to build the map, right, for California of what is needed where, and how are we going to be building this reimbursement structure, and what kind of infrastructure are we going to be needing. And that's why I used that 1383 example, because we're still struggling in California with that, right? Because it isn't just that we need optical sorters everywhere or that we need compost facilities everywhere, right? It's more nuanced in different jurisdictions, right? It's a specific conversation in specific areas, much like Dave was saying. San Diego's conversation is different than the conversation in Napa or San Francisco or Redding, right? So the conversation or the application for reimbursement or cost coverage will be different. So there will be an application for cost coverage that will go through, and part of this process and part of this survey is us developing that application. And that's one of the things that Susan is working very hard on right now, is what is that application going to look like, and how are we going to make that as simple as possible for jurisdictions to understand and work through. And so that's why when I asked Susan and Dave and Wendy to explain why we're doing this, is we're doing this because we're building our plan, and we're trying to do this so that we're building a process that works for our partnership, so that the plan can be built to build that process. This is much more about the process than the needs assessment. And so this is, to answer your question, we're building the process, not the information to evaluate what you're going to need. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah. So
Yeah.
just to clarify, when I fill out an application for a reimbursement for, let's just say, updating some educational material because we're taking a new material, let's just say, you're not going to look back at this survey necessarily that we did of our 2022 baseline to say, oh, no, sorry, we can't reimburse you for that because of X of what you said in this survey we did.
I wouldn't say that. No, I would say, if we said, well, that might look inconsistent with something you said, and we might question that. But no, you're going to apply and say, hey, look, we want to update our educational material, and here's why we want to update it. And we'll say, okay, so this is what we need from you. So no, the application is going to be the application.
If I could
Okay.
add to that, I think you bring up this conversation brings up a good point. There will likely be some variations in the funding mechanism based on the different types of processes and projects. So public education probably is going to look a little different than a capital investment request, right? And so a capital investment request is going to look at that 2023 baseline to understand the difference in whatever the application is for additional investment. What's the net difference in the net increase in that application? That looks different than likely a public education and a public education and outreach application. So we're aware of that. And those are the nuances that we're building that I think Rachel's alluding to, that, we recognize that this is not one size fits all, whether it's a local jurisdiction or whether it's a type of investment. We need to be able to be flexible, and we need to look at the needs to be able to accurately support those investments for growing the recycling programs to meet the requirements of the act looking forward.
Okay, I think I get it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
But just to put a fine point on it, this is what this and I keep saying survey, but it's really interviews and asking questions. What we're really doing here is building the process, right? And it's trying to build a process that works across the state, but acknowledges the unique differences across all of the jurisdictions.
There's a more sort of administrative question from Simone on when the surveys will go out and how much time will we have to complete them. I'll let Dave answer the collection one, but for the MRFs, we are starting to reach out, first a phone call, and then we'll follow up and set up a time to meet with you all. So that's happening now. And then expect us to be reaching out to you over the next weeks. And we'll trying to gather the information by the end of August, again, working with you all on, trying to find times that work with you. So, and I know Dave's got a process lined up for the collection side.
Yeah, we're going to reach out to people by phone first and make sure that we've got the right individuals. And then we're going to follow up by sending the survey. Our goal is to not just send out the survey and have people try and figure it out. We'd like to, make that initial contact, find out when a good time to have a brief meeting with you, and then talk about time frame. So we hope to make all the initial contacts within the next couple of weeks and get this done by, I want to say, end of August, middle of September.
And with that, we are at right about time. So thank you everybody for joining today. If you missed it in the chat, we will be circulating the webinar recording and the slide deck, and that includes our contact information in case you have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you all.